My name is Elle, and I'm a transgender woman talking about identity yet again. It's been a week since I've had the chance to talk with you, my beautiful people and friends out there. As always, I'm grateful for your emails. I continue every week. I get emails from folks who are reaching out with questions or suggestions for the show or requests for support or just, saying, hey, I'm here, it's nice to meet you. So thank you for reaching out through whatever means. I always put the email address for the show in the show notes of every episode, twatpodcasting at gmail.com. It's my little tongue-in-cheek. This week I am recording the show on video. So we will be on YouTube, and you get to see my pretty little face this week. If you'd like, check the show notes for that link in order to see the YouTube post. I'm recording today in my office at the clinic where I get to do therapy with folks. It is such an honor to do this work and to get to be able to sit with people in their dark and difficult moments and help them fight and claw their way out of it. And to hear their stories and to help them work through the dark stuff that's going on. It's really a beautiful thing. So it feels appropriate here to be in the office. Today, like I said, I'm going to talk about identity. This is part 5 of the series, Am I Transgender? If you have not listened to parts 1 through 4, you won't be totally lost by diving in here, but I would recommend going back to listen because it's sort of part of the answer. And essentially, the origins of this series is that this is a huge question for me. I was 39 years old when I came out of the closet to myself, at least where I was able to be fully honest with myself. And so it felt really important to me to be correct, to be right about this. Like, am I actually a transgender? I have all these things going on in my life. I have all these feelings that I've experienced, that I've gone through. I have all of this stuff happening. But am I actually correct as I evaluate these things? Am I correct? Is it true that I am actually transgender? And you may ask that question yourself. And there's a little bit of an edge of defensiveness to it as well. I think by default, at least in American culture, people don't believe us. I think about, as I've mentioned on the program before, folks that look at us as being some kind of duplicitous people who are trying to gain access to women's spaces in order to abuse and assault people, which is unsubstantiated at best and just purely prejudicial and not even stereotypical, just prejudicial, like based in fantasy fears at worst. But I think that by and large, the culture is sort of set up to not believe us. And so we may feel like we have to defend ourselves, like there's no choice. And so part of my work when I was first coming to terms with this part of myself was to work on, well, how am I indeed trans? And, over the years, all of these different aspects of myself had come up, all these different feelings, like everything that I ended up sort of collecting into this long document. They were things that I was already aware of in the past, but I never looked at them collectively as a group. And for me, that ended up being really, really powerful because it was easy to rationalize away one of these answers to that question. How do I know I'm trans? But it was impossible to rationalize away all of them. That I'm a woman is the most elegant explanation to all of the data when it's all looked at together. In the past versions of this, I've talked a little bit about my preoccupation with trans people and trans culture, the feelings of despair that I had being trapped in a life that didn't feel true to me, thoughts about my prayers and, thinking about the matrix pill test and magical transformations and years and years of different kinds of gender expansive expression. Last time in part 4 of this, I talked a little bit about the mirror and standing in front of the mirror and how the feelings and thoughts that have come to mind for years and years and years doing that activity helped me know. I talked about disassociation and emotional austerity. I talked about grieving the life of girlhood that I didn't ever get to have, at least until now, but even then that I lost out on, the pain of transphobia, the joy of gender euphoria. Those are some of the themes. And I would say at this point, I'm about halfway through my list, so you can expect more of these episodes down the road. Am I transgender? We're going to keep going with it, and hopefully you will continue to find it valuable. As a whole, I think that these episodes are among the most listened to on the podcast, and certainly Am I Transgender Part 1 is by far the most listened to episode that we've done on the show so far. I'm gonna talk about three more things, three more ways that I know that I'm transgender on the show today, and then we'll keep plowing forward with other programs in future episodes. The first that I want to talk about today is new dysphoria. What a lot of times happens for people who are trans is after coming out, like we're kind of, we go along with, different levels or different experiences of dysphoria. At least for me, there are different times in my life I felt greater distress about my body, my gender, the roles, expectations, socially, etc. And so it would kind of like ebb and flow. But a lot of times what happens is, gender dysphoria kind of grows to a point, and then we're able to relieve some of it by coming out, by expressing ourselves differently, by starting hormone therapy. But then frequently with that relief, there's also a big spike. And that at least is a well-known dynamic amongst trans feminine people, I think especially, or maybe not especially, but I'm more familiar with trans feminine people, being one myself. But it's not uncommon for folks who are trans, after they start their transition, after they've been out publicly for a while, to experience a real spike in dysphoria. And I know for me, early on when I was going through some of those experimentation phases where I was trying on different clothes, I was starting to buy clothes for myself, which I had never done in the past because it felt so forbidden and so scary. I'd always bummed clothes off of other people or tried them on in the dressing room at department stores or something like that. But I remember looking at myself in the mirror in those early sort of phases, and I began to realize and to experience and feel a self-hatred that I think had always been there, and that I think I had inherited from the culture around me that hates trans people. But it was also like this realization that I had become this thing that I had hated, or that I was becoming this thing that I had hated. And so there were times early on there in transition where I saw myself in the mirror, and I I had a dress on and cute shoes and, a wig. At the time, I didn't have my, hair grown out like I do now. But, I had a wig on and makeup and earrings and the whole thing. And I looked at myself in the mirror and I would just feel really, really intense disgust. And I would just hate myself. And I would see the parts of myself that did not align with what I wanted to see or who I knew myself to be. And I'd see the hairiness of my body or my size. And I would see, like a dude in a dress, honestly, which is like such a painful transphobic trope. And that kind of rhetoric was embedded in me. And it was really, really painful, that heightened amount of dysphoria. And, sort of stepping back from that painful experience. And I mean, honestly, like there were lots of other ones, early on, I was frequently misgendered when I was out in public. It's been much, much less frequent that people have misgendered me. Usually it has to do with my voice over the phone at this point, because folks see me and they see how I'm presenting, and, it's sort of like they're going to look like a real asshole if they misgender me, or maybe they just read me as a cisgender woman. I don't know, but, or maybe they read me as a trans woman and they're polite. I don't know, but misgendering is much less common now. But, at the beginning, it was the exception that I was gendered correctly by people, where they would call me she or her or miss or ma'am or whatever. Usually it was he, and every time that happened, it felt like a dagger in my heart. It like really, really hurt, and it took some of my hope away, and it took some of my joy away, and it really accentuated and heightened my sense of dysphoria. And, here's the thing. One of the things that came to mind as I was processing some of this, early on is, if I was like a fetishist, or like, like a fetish cross-dresser kind of type, which, there's lots of thought about that. I feel like in the trans community, I wonder how many people who are cross-dressers really are trans, and they're just, transphobic about themselves and they're not able to admit it. I mean, I suppose that there are probably people out there, I guess, where the clothes that they wear is a sexual thing. But, for me, especially as I started to wear women's clothing and to like sort of put on what felt like kind of a persona at the time, because I was living my life as a man, it felt really awful. It didn't felt good, as I said. And to me, if this was like a fetish for me, or if this was like some kind of, kink or whatever, then that experience, I would have expected it to be fun. I would have expected it to be like arousing, and exciting and all that. And it just wasn't, it was heightened levels of dysphoria. In a lot of ways, it felt really awful. And then, just continuing on, like living as myself, living and coming out publicly, there's been more and more layers of dysphoria that have shown up that I wasn't totally aware of prior, and a lot of those have to do with social dysphoria, and the good feelings that come with being treated like a girl. Obviously, I'm not embracing of or excited about misogyny, and that's a part of womanhood that needs to be changed and that I'm not okay with, and that is deeply troubling and unpleasant. And at the same time, it's been a relief to be out from under the expectations of male roles that never felt true to me, never felt like something that I gave consent for or were in alignment with my soul. So all these different ways that new dysphoria has shown up in transition for me is yet another way that I know that I'm transgender. A second one for today's episode, I write, is my personal sense of mission. Now, the last two I'm going to talk about today, including this one, are a little bit more on the woo-woo side. They're a little more woo and mystical and out there and spiritual. But, this is part of my story, and I support and recognize anyone who does not share in a sense of faith in a divine or a world of existence outside the natural or the physical. And I bless and salute no matter where you're at in terms of your philosophy or belief system or worldview. And I want to take up space here and just be true to my own. And that's all I'm saying. So this is not advocacy, but so when I was still presenting as a man, and I may have told this story on the show before, but when I was still presenting as a man, I went on this men's retreat weekend, and it really impacted me deeply. And I didn't walk away feeling like I was more of a man necessarily, although that was something that I was really wrestling with and trying to make peace with and trying to be more comfortable being a man or be content with being a man or whatever. I didn't necessarily come away with that, but I did come away with a newfound sense of mission or purpose on my life. Up until that point, I had been working as a pastor. I'd been doing pastor work for 4 or 5 years or something at that point. And up until then, I saw being a pastor as my mission in life, as my purpose in life, as my calling. And in my case, that was also my vocation. It's what I did for work. And I was working within and for this organization that I was discovering policies and dynamics that I was not in alignment with morally or theologically. And I started to be afraid that I might lose that opportunity, that I might lose that position. And it was really, really scary because I equated my sense of life purpose and life mission with my vocation. And so the thought of losing that job was like terrifying. It was like threatening my meaning in life. And so as it turns out, going on this retreat helped me to separate my sense of personal life purpose and my vocation. Right? If that makes sense. So I started to see that, I'm here on this planet for something bigger and different than, just working for the church. And working for the church is the right thing right now, but it may not be always the right thing. And if it ceases to be the right thing at some point in the future, I will still be able to live my life and to contribute to the goodness in the world, and I will still have some kind of transcendent purpose over my life. And, making that discovery on this men's retreat was life-saving. It really, really helped me at the time. And essentially, I grasped on to this concept of inclusion. That was the underlying word that I heard. And it really took hold of me. And it was clear to me that the reason that I was put on this planet, the reason that I was here in the first place, the reason that my soul exists is to work for the inclusion of all people, that every single person would have a place at the table of life, of the table of grace, and that they would find their way to contribute and to love and to serve and to be. I want to be a person of inclusion. And so I walked away with a lot less anxiety about my job because it was like, okay, well, my job as pastor, I can work toward inclusion at that job. But if I end up with a different job, I will still be able to work toward a work of inclusion. And as it turns out, going through transition, I think is actually an essential step for me in living out my life purpose of inclusion. And the reason is because I think that in order for me to live a life that's centered around inclusion, I have to start with myself. And if I'm not able to love and to include and to embrace my own self, then there's no chance that it's going to possibly flow outward. It's not going to happen. Up until that point, I hated the trans part of myself. I wanted to hide it. I was ashamed of it. I was scared of it. I didn't want anything to do with it. I wanted to be anything else but trans, and I tried it. And what I have discovered through my process of transition is that actually my life purpose, my personal sense of mission lies on the other side of transition, because in order for me to really live that life of inclusion, I had to start with myself. And in order to start with myself, I had to be honest about who I fucking was, which is a trans woman who's beautiful and who's loved and who's good enough and who's smart and who is full of joy and who has something to say and to give to this planet. And it's obvious on this side of it that my calling in life lies through transition. But at the time, it wasn't that obvious, and it was really, really scary. It was terrifying, in fact. And it's proven to be true. I believe it with all of my heart. My life purpose in this world is to create inclusion, starting with Miss Elle. Am I transgender? Number 3 on today's episode, it has to do with timing. And I already said that I had the last 2 were mystical. That personal sense of mission, that was a bit mystical. This gets a little bit mystical yet, and it has to do with timing. For a lot of the work that I did, so I first told my psychiatrist that I thought I might be trans when I was about 38. I had told a previous therapist that I thought I might be trans, or I thought I might be experiencing gender dysphoria, and they kind of poo-pooed it away. I think I talked about that in the episode about therapy. But they, really dismissed that idea, and it ended up, I think, kind of setting me back a number of years. Because, certainly at that time, I didn't want to be trans, and so it was a relief to hear from them, oh, no, that's not a real thing. But anyway, finally, I did tell my psychiatrist about my feelings of gender dysphoria and my questions about gender, and I was about at age 38 at that time. And as she and I went through the process of unpacking some of this stuff, I had an immense amount of guilt and regret and sadness at the delay. Here I was, 38 years old. Why couldn't have I done this at 28? Why couldn't have I done this at 18? Why couldn't have I been honest earlier in life? Here I am. I have a fucking hairy back, and I'm like this gigantic, huge, man-shouldered person, and I hated myself, and I hated myself for being what I considered a coward, honestly, of not facing these things until I was age 38. And, one of the things that she said is something that I'll never forget, and that I've actually repeated to some of my own clients in therapy, which is, if you could have, you would have. If you could have, you would have. Right now is the time that you're doing it, because right now is the right time. You're doing it now because you're able to do it now, and you weren't able to do it before, but now you're the person who's able to show up for yourself. If you could have, you would have. And so all there is to do now is to give yourself grace and to move forward with courage and with joy and with love for yourself. And so that's what I did. If you could have, you would have. If I could have, I would have. But I couldn't. And so I didn't. but God damn it, now I can. It's going to happen for me now. I'm going to be honest. I'm really going to search this stuff out. I'm really going to figure it out because I can now. I have it in me. The timing is right. And there's a lot of other things that lined up for me at that time in terms of the timing. You know, we had moved to California, which is especially Southern California, is a far more progressive and diverse area than where I was in rural Washington State, where almost everyone thinks and looks like me, or thinks and looks like most of the people that are there. But, you know, I passed as a white man, and that was like the norm. That was like the standard in that place. Not white women, white men. And, you know, being in California where things, I mean, the population is so much bigger, the diversity in terms of ethnic, language, background, socioeconomic, immigration status, sexual orientation, gender identity, religious tradition. I mean, go down the line, and it is so much more diverse. Now, obviously, there are problems in Southern California, and obviously, there are challenges with forced and unforced segregation. There's lots of stuff going on. However, being able to be in this place felt like it opened up a huge door for me to be able to be honest. I mean, one of the simple ways just had to do with like the mechanics of it. You know, I was able to go to Palm Springs on my day off once in a while, once a month, once a week. I mean, probably not once a week, but you know, somewhat frequently I was able to like dress up as Elle and put on a dress and make makeup and go to Palm Springs and go do my work and drink coffee. And it was amazing. It was an amazing way to feel anonymous but safe and to test these things out. And had I been where I was living before in this little tiny rural community, that was just not an option. It was not possible. Being able to find other queer people. You know, my wife and I, we found other families that were just like ours, that lived just down the street from us, who were families where, you know, one of the spouses transitioned during their marriage and they, you know, were fine. And that was like completely foreign in the place that we were before. There's so many different ways in which being here in this space allowed for it. I think about the economic opportunities that come along with being here, and on and on and on. That timing really seemed to line up perfectly. We had some family stuff happen in our family that emerged after I came out, and it was such a relief again that happened after, and that we were able to absorb and to digest these things on different schedules and on different calendars. It felt like such a huge relief and benefit in terms of the timing. Again, it was like, oh, that was the right moment to let Paige know about this thing. Another aspect of timing was something that I had a therapist, a different therapist who worked with me through the early parts of transition and helped me kind of answer some of these questions and process gender identity. And one of the things that she said that I'm really grateful for, and that I will, never forget, is like, what a time to be trans. Now, this was before the transphobic tirade of the Republican Party in 2022 and 2023. But, it felt at the time and this was probably, during the pandemic maybe, or on the tail end of the pandemic, it felt at the time like there was this growing awareness of trans people, and like it was coming to a head, and Laverne Cox was starring in Orange is the New Black, and like there was, people knew more about trans folks. And certainly when I came out of the closet, I had to explain what trans was to everyone, because nobody really knew at that point. Now, here at this point in 2023, the Republican Party has pressed the conversation, this like totally bad faith conversation about us in such a way that folks have either had to get educated or they've been, indoctrinated by hate. But everyone has an opinion about trans people now, but not then. And my therapist said, what a time to be trans. The world needs you. Here you are, this trans woman who's a pastor coming out of the closet. The world needs you. The church needs you. What a time to do this. And again, it was this reinforcement of the time is right. All these things are coming together. Now, obviously, there's nothing objective about this. There's nothing mystical, or there's nothing substantive about this at all. It's very mystical and very subjective. But for me, it holds a lot of weight and it holds a lot of water, and it gives me a lot of confidence as I ask that question, am I transgender? Yes, indeed I am. Because I did when I could. I did because I could. I did in this moment because the moment was right for me, and the universe had aligned in such a way to allow for me to be true. We have come to the end of another episode. Thanks so much for listening. Thanks so much for joining me again. Your reviews and your ratings, especially on iTunes, are of immense value to me. If you're able to take a moment to leave a review, to just write out a few sentences about the show, what you appreciate about it, give me a 5-star rating. It really, really helps things along. We've had more than 15,000 people listen to the program over the course of the last year, and we're sneaking up on the 1-year anniversary of Transgender Woman Talking, and I'm excited to see where the conversation leads in future years. So thanks so much for joining and for just showing up, and most of all, thanks for showing up for yourself. You're hella cool. And I just used the word hella, which is straight out of 2000. And so I probably should end the episode now at this point. But you are really cool. And I'm so glad to have you along for the ride. Again, my name is indeed Elle. And I am a transgender woman talking.